Hi. First of all, I want to say I really like the way you've grown the movement, and each time you say, okay, this is working, but it's not doing enough. So what else can we do? And then you moved on to divestment, and I've been reading a bit about divestment in the last few weeks, just a little bit, and I've been reading some of the criticisms of it as well. And one point that I haven't seen a good explanation of is the actual divesting itself, the weakening of the companies economically. That's said to be negligible even by the people who support divestment. What they say is really going to make the difference is removing the social license. And that will remove the lobbying power of the companies. And I haven't really seen a good explanation of how that is the case, but I wanted to put that question to you.
Yeah, it's a good question.
Okay, I'll take two more. Stick your hands up again so I can get a chance to see you. And I'll start with this lady here.
Hi, Bill. That's great to see all these photos, and thanks for the insight on 350. We're part of 350 Ireland. We're called People's Climate, and I just wanted to say that if you wanted to be involved with the movement, you're welcome to join us on Facebook, People's Climate Ireland. Contact us, send us a message directly, and
there's a good organizer. Okay.
And man with the beard in the middle of that row. Phil, keep going up. And then, because that wasn't a question, we can have another one.
Thank you, Bill. Phil Carney, on Taoiseach Climate Change Committee. Thank you so much for what you've said. You've talked about civil disobedience. It would appear that this is no longer optional. This is essential for us to continue the fight. I would appreciate if you'd say a little bit more about how to prepare for that, and do you agree that it's essential? Both Naomi Klein and the Pope have said that what is required is a revolution. I think you've said the same yourself. So I'd appreciate if you would address that explicitly. Thank you.
And one more in this round. This woman here at the corner and at the end of the row in the purplish top.
I can't say how much I admire what 350.org is doing, and I'm going to join right away. I wanted to say, however, I'm not going to leave this conference without mentioning the N word, which is nuclear. I think a lot of otherwise intelligent people believe that nuclear is an interim technology. My view is that it's going to destroy the planet, even if we got rid of all of the oil and gas today. That the nuclear waste and the nuclear pollution, not just from the bombs, but from the power plants themselves, which are used to make bombs. This is something that we also have to deal with, and I'd be willing to try to stop that any way I could. And I wonder what your view is on that. Sure. I know you can't do everything.
So, divestment, civil disobedience, and nuclear.
Yes, it's easy. The first question around divestment, and I guess we'll get to talk a little more about divestment in the group a little bit later, but it's an important point. By itself, it probably isn't sufficient to accomplish what needs accomplishing, okay? But it's already done one thing enormously well. It's spread this notion everywhere that we have way more carbon than we can burn. It's taken, it's taken this notion of what we were calling a carbon bubble, these sort of, and gotten it everywhere. And when it went into the financial community, it was really interesting. The phrase that they used to describe it was less carbon bubble. They talked about stranded assets, okay? And so for them, it became the analog. You guys might remember that at a certain point in history, people built way more houses than they needed to, all over the place. And you were left with stranded assets, which were, well, that's for the financial community, how they're now starting to view coal and oil and gas, and it's why it's getting much easier to prevent investment in these expansion schemes, okay? But it continues to have enormous power to just remove that, as you described it, social license from these places. If the, Anglican diocese of Australia, big coal country, says we're not willing to invest in this anymore, okay? It removes a kind of social sanction. Remember, not everything in the world is just brute force and money overall. There's money usually wins, but it can't if the kind of if enough people have decided that it's just not okay what's going on. It doesn't happen that often, but it did happen around apartheid. When Nelson Mandela got out of prison, the first trip he took was to the US, and he didn't go first to the White House. He went first out to Berkeley in California to thank students at the University of California system, who were one of 155 universities in the US that had divested from apartheid-tainted stock. And he said, yes, we worked to free ourselves, but we couldn't have done it without the global pressure that you guys were able to apply in this way. It didn't drive down the stock price necessarily of GE or whatever overnight, but it did change the flavor of the debate. Our job, one of our jobs always as movement builders, is to change the zeitgeist, okay? When you change the zeitgeist, then, so think about, in my country, gay marriage 15 years ago was, not in the cards, and now it's to the point where everybody supports it. We changed the zeitgeist around this issue quickly, and this divestment campaign has proved one of the best ways of doing that because it allows everyone to stand up to this industry, not just people who happen to live next to a coal mine, okay? So it's good. As for nuclear power, look, I don't think that it's as dangerous as carbon. I mean, I think nothing that we've ever done comes close to being as dangerous as dramatically elevating the temperature of the planet. I do think it's dangerous, and I think that the real reason that we're not going to do much nuclear power, and I don't think we are, is that it's also incredibly expensive to do it, okay? It pays to be realistic about economics at all times, okay, to try to change the economics. And by the way, the smartest thing we could have done and should be doing is putting a serious price on carbon, which would help drive, but we can't at the moment because of the power of the fossil fuel industry, hence we do things like divestment. But even absent a price on carbon, all you have to do is go look at a chart for the cost of nuclear power, which just keeps going up and up and up and up, and then go look at a chart for the cost of solar energy or wind energy, which has just plummeted and will continue to plummet. The thing to remember about sun and wind is that they're not fuels in the way that we're used to thinking of, like coal, gas, oil, even uranium, okay? There's an endless supply of sunshine, but solar power should be thought of as a technology, okay? It's the solar panel that and so the price of it will keep going down and down and down, just like the price of this kept going down and down and down, okay? That's where the world wants to go. Sort of the physics of the world want us, I think, to go strongly in this direction of what the engineers call distributed generation. Not another generation of big centralized power stations, but a grid that treats energy the way we now treat information on the internet, with thousands, millions of nodes putting in and taking out, a kind of farmer's market in electrons, and it's quite possible now. Indeed, we see it happening most quickly in places around the world where there is no electric grid yet. And I don't know whether you talked about this about Bangladesh this morning or not, but that's a perfect example of a place where we're seeing very rapid build out of solar. I saw the first solar panel in Bangladesh 25 years ago on a school roof in rural Bangladesh. Now they're installing 60, 70,000 systems a month, yes, and all across the nation. They think it'll be everywhere by 2021. We could do that same thing around the world if we set our mind to it. The best outcome of the Paris conference in December would be a world global agreement on quick, powerful financing to make sure we could do this all over the world. As to the question of civil disobedience, well, look, it's one tool in the toolkit. You don't have to go get arrested all the time, okay? Like any other tool, if you do it too much, the tool gets dull and doesn't work anymore, okay? But there are moments when it is useful to underline the moral urgency of something or to bring it to the forefront in a way that people can't ignore. One of the great, maybe the great, I think when people look back at the 20th century in 500 years, the invention that will seem most interesting to them from that vantage point is not nuclear technology. It's not. I think the invention that'll be most interesting will probably be the invention of nonviolent civil disobedience, largely invented by people like Gandhi, refined by people like Dr. King. We don't know that much about it yet. We don't have great institutions like West Point or Sandhurst or something for studying nonviolence. But we're getting there. We're working it out as we go along, and I become more convinced all the time of its remarkable power. This is the biggest issue we've ever faced. If you were keeping your powder dry for some important occasion, the important occasion has arrived. So, be honest.
There are two educational institutions co-sponsoring this conference, and I know they're already talking about what they can do next. Now we have a challenge for them to set up the West Point for Nonviolent Direct Action in Ireland as an action. I'm looking at organisers. Do we have our time for two more questions? Two more questions. I see one here and up the back. I see a few hands up the back. I'm going to go right up to the guy with the beard, the way back on the left-hand side.
Ronan Tynan. First of all, before I ask a brief question, I just have to congratulate you on your, I was aware of 350, but the way you casually flick through your achievements, your global impact has been phenomenal, and you and your colleagues, if you haven't won it already, you deserve the Nobel Peace Prize. But you just used one line there about the need to transform Irish agriculture, and it just brought back to me the fact that greenhouse gas emissions from animal agriculture could be responsible for much more than 14.5% of the total. So it is a real issue, and it's one we really haven't begun to talk about in Ireland. I am very much grateful that you mentioned that. But I just wonder, is it true, if we're really going to address it, that as individuals we have to face up to the fact that if we want to be serious, we have to seriously consider our diet and embrace the notion of a plant-based diet. Those of us who are able and enthusiastic, like myself, I admit it wasn't a sacrifice. I have to put that on the record. I was very lucky that a couple of people in my life are particularly good cooks in that department. But it's something I'm struggling with myself in the culinary department. But it is a winnable battle, let me tell you, folks. And I haven't become quite enthusiastic about it. But I'm really serious about this. Don't we have to address the diet issue? Do we have to migrate from meat and dairy and take the plant-based diet seriously? Thanks very much.
And just before we take the last question at the top.
Hello, my name is Enda. I write songs about climate change. Anyway, I have a question about reconciling the fact that kind of on the one hand we vilify fossil fuel use, and on the other hand, many of us would have used fossil fuels to get here today, and indeed the energy that's been used here is burning some of the peatlands that we have in Ireland right here at the moment. And it's kind of like, one sense, yes, we have these great ideals, but then our day-to-day habits let us down. But yet, if we just sat down and went into a field somewhere, we'd get nothing done either. So how do you reconcile all that?
Well, actually, these two questions are very related. And they go at a very interesting question about how we make change happen. A question I don't have the final answer for in any way, and kind of, as I say, we're working it out as we go along. But my observation is that we can get 4 or 5% of people roused up and ready to really fight about this if we work really hard, get them really engaged and passionate and engaged in this. 4 or 5% is a lot. I mean, in my country, I don't think we ever got more than 1 or 2% of people involved in the civil rights movement, but that was enough, okay? 4 or 5% of people, if the main activity we give them is changing their diet or making their own lives very low carbon, putting in, doing all the right things to their home, so on and so forth, that 4 or 5% won't have a discernible impact on the amount of carbon in the atmosphere. But 4 or 5% of people are enough to win almost any political fight that there is. Because you have to remember that in one sense, apathy is your great friend. It means that there's not that many people riled up on the other side to go prevent you from doing what you want to do, okay? So to me, the most efficient use of resources, since this is in the end a structural and systemic problem, is to get people engaged in the fight in that way. Now, that doesn't mean that the other stuff's not important. Look, my roof is covered with solar panels. I drove the first hybrid electric car in my state of Vermont. We do eat low on the food chain, and we spent a year where we didn't eat a single thing that didn't come out of our little valley along Lake Champlain, you know. Those things are important. I like doing them, but I don't try to fool myself that they're actually the way that we're solving this problem. If we are able to break the power of the fossil fuel industry, if we're able to put a price on carbon, if we're able to switch places over to sun and wind, then many of these things will start to happen. Many of the other sort of things we need will start to happen to some degree or another on their own. For instance, there's nothing as dependent on cheap fossil fuel as intensive agribusiness agriculture, okay? You couldn't do what we do in the States, where you have, we have hog operations with 3 million head of swine, and things like that. You couldn't do it without that cheap fossil fuel. So I guess I think the most important thing, individuals can do lots of important things in their life, and I kind of trust that everybody in this room has done most of them. If you haven't changed your light bulbs, then please do. But the most important thing an individual can do is not be an individual, okay? Is find other people to join with in order to make the structural and systemic change that actually has some hope of shifting us in the narrow portion of time that physics allows. That's how it seems to me. Thank you all enormously. Thank you.
Thanks, Bill. Taking up his last point, this is a conference about evidence to action. You all know about the climate bill. You've been the drivers of that campaign for the last 8 years. If you Google Avaz Alan Kelly climate law, you'll get the petition that Trocaire, Friends of the Earth, and the rest of Stop Climate Chaos have going to fix it. And if you take two of the things Bill mentioned, turf and solar, Alex White, the Minister for Energy, is going to have a new national policy on energy in September. Write to him, tell him we should stop burning turf and he should put a price so that we can all get paid for solar we generate. That can help drive the changes we need in Ireland.
What he said, that's right.